Her true story from Alaska. They rushed me. Just sign here, Grandma. So I sent the document to a lawyer instead. What he found made their faces go white. The paper trembled in my hand, not from fear, but from the weight of betrayal. The ink was still fresh. The air wasn't. It stank of pressure, of greed, of the same cheap perfume my daughter-in-law wore when she cried on my shoulder the night her husband first hit her. My son, I remember thinking how fragile she seemed back then. Tonight, she looked anything but. If you don't sign this today, she hissed, her fingers clenched around the back of my chair, don't expect to see anyone in this house again. Not me. Not your precious grandson. You want to die alone in this icebox, be my guest. Her voice was low, cold, calculated. Then came his voice, deeper, sharper, nastier. My grandson. Sign it and go rot in that nursing home, he said, laughing without humor. Every extra day you breathe in here just makes this house more disgusting. You cooked and wiped asses. Grandma, that's it? You think that means you get to cling to land like this? This house. Please. I sat there at the dinner table, surrounded, one on either side. The kitchen was warm, the wood stove still glowing, but it felt like I was freezing. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, just as it always did in late November. It whispered across the windows, tapping like it wanted to come in and carry me away from all this. Before we start, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Try to watch the videos as long as possible. By watching more often, YouTube will promote these stories to a larger audience, grow your channel, and bring you more interesting things. Let's start now. I said nothing. I reached for my glasses, slipped them on, and stared at the stack of papers they had so confidently slid before me. The pen lay beside it, uncapped, waiting for my shaking hand. My daughter-in-law looked triumphant already, like she thought the battle was over. My grandson leaned back, arms crossed, smirking like a villain in a cheap TV show. This was not how it was supposed to be. I was not supposed to be here in my own kitchen being told I was unwanted, being told I was useless. This was the same table where I had fed them both since they were children, where I had stitched clothes late at night after the storm of '81, where I had nursed my husband's frostbitten hands when he came home from digging graves for the ones who didn't survive. I looked at that stove, the same one he built from scraps and sweat, and I heard his voice. It came back so clearly, like he was still here, brushing snow from his beard and tugging off his boots. As long as you keep that fire lit, Anna, he'd say, this house is ours. Let the snow come. Let it bury the world. Our bones will rest right here, where they belong. He died 2 winters ago. Hart stopped in the garden while clearing snow, just like he wanted working. Quiet, with his back straight. I buried him under the old spruce by the frozen lake. It was his favorite view. The land didn't shake when he died, but mine did. Nothing had been steady since. I thought grief would be the hardest part. I was wrong. If you've ever been kicked out of the very place you helped build, leave a 13 so we know we're not alone. Tick-tock, my grandson sneered. Or are we waiting for you to have another stroke and drool on the paperwork? We've got appointments tomorrow. The movers won't wait. That was it. Their real urgency. Not my health. Not my well-being. Not even pretending anymore. They had things to do. Money to make. This house. This land. It was their ticket out. Out of what? Out of hard work. Out of their own Mediocrity. I turned the first page slowly. Legalese? So much of it. They had highlighted the signature lines for me in bright yellow. How thoughtful. A full packet. Ownership transfers. Medical power of attorney. End-of-leaf consent forms. All streamlined. All too tidy. They must have been planning this for months. My daughter-in-law leaned closer. You always said you didn't want to be a burden. Well, now's your chance to prove it. I nodded faintly, as if absorbing the logic of that twisted appeal. She had a voice like gravel soaked in vinegar, coarse, sharp, unrelenting. But the worst part wasn't the words. It was the calm certainty. She truly believed she was right. You think we're doing this for us? She added. We're doing this so you can have dignity. My laugh surprised even me. A short breath, brittle and dry. Dignity, I echoed. They froze. I picked up the pen. She gasped in relief, stepping back, arms folded. My grandson exhaled audibly, already imagining renovations and resale value. I held the pen above the page, and then I set it down. Carefully, precisely, as if I were placing the last stone on a grave. I'm not signing, I said quietly. My daughter-in-law blinked. Excuse me, I looked her dead in the eye. You heard me. My grandson scoffed. You're kidding. You'd rather die in this shack than move into somewhere safe? You're going senile? No, I said. But you are greedy. The silence that followed was thick and hot, even as snow gathered on the windowsill behind me. I rose slowly. My knees cracked like old wood, but I stood. This house was built by hands that bled and froze for it. This land saw births and burials, and now it sees you. I pushed the papers toward them, untouched. If you ever speak to me like that again, I said, do not expect to find this door unlocked. Then I turned and left the room, not to slam doors, not to scream, just to breathe. Outside, the cold bit my skin, but it felt cleaner than the heat in that kitchen. I walked to the shed where we kept the old snowshoes, and I stood still for a moment, just long enough to let the wind carry away the echo of their voices. I was not going anywhere. Not yet. The wind howled outside like it always did in early winter, weaving through the trees and rattling the loose metal on the shed roof. But it was not the sound that haunted me. It was the memory of another wind, one that came in 1981 and never fully left. That winter storm nearly swallowed the entire region. We had no warning, just a sudden drop in pressure and the sky turning the kind of gray that makes animals run and grown men quiet. The radio lines cut out by nightfall. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Roads vanished. But our house, this house, stood through it all. My husband and I had built it from scratch. Months before the storm came, we hauled logs ourselves, dragged stones by sled, and hammered each board with frozen fingers. We were young but determined, poor but stubborn, and full of the kind of belief that love could warm any cold. He designed a frame to face away from the wind and built the foundation deep into the frozen earth. I remember how he used to say, "If this place can't keep us safe, then nowhere will." When the blizzard hit, it came with a vengeance. Visibility dropped to nothing. The generator gave out in most of the valley. People tried to drive out, tried to walk for help, but the snow buried them faster than they could move. That was when the first knock came. It was a little after midnight. The wind was shrieking, the kind that pulls tears out of your eyes whether you want to cry or not. My husband opened the door, and there stood a young couple, frost clinging to their eyelashes, the woman carrying a baby under her coat. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "We saw your chimney." He didn't hesitate, not for a second. He ushered them in, pulled blankets from the bedroom, told me to heat broth. That was the first. By dawn, there were 20 people in this little house. Neighbors, strangers, a retired teacher, a mailman, 2 teenagers who had been stuck in a snowdrift for nearly 8 hours. We ran out of beds the first hour. After that, we gave up the chairs, then the floor space. People leaned against walls, curled near the stove, tucked into corners like feral cats, just trying to survive. For 3 days, we fed them, warmed them, prayed with them. My husband chopped wood until his hands blistered and bled. I cooked rice and water when the broth ran out. We boiled snow to make tea, passed around old wool socks like treasure. I remember one man crying, just from the feel of dry socks on his feet. When the storm finally cleared and the search teams arrived, not one person in our house had lost a toe to frostbite. Not one. They called our cabin a miracle, but it was not a miracle. It was love and labor, sweat and faith. Every beam in this house, every stone in its hearth, had been laid with the intention of safety, not just for us, but for whoever needed it. After that winter, people in town referred to our place as the warm house, not because it was physically warm, but because it had opened itself when everything else closed. I wish he could have lived to see the sign they made, a small wooden plaque that said just that, The Warm House Est, 1981. He hung it by the front door with pride, brushing his fingers across it every time he came in from the cold. When he passed, 2 winters ago, I thought the warmth might go with him, but every morning since, I have lit the stove, alone, quietly, reverently. I chop wood the same way he used to, though slower now. I sweep the hearth, boil tea, and whisper his name when the embers crackled just right. This house, this land, is the last piece of him I have, the last piece I belong to. People assume that grief comes loudly. It does not. It settles in the floorboards, in the empty rocking chair, in the cup left drying by the sink. It curls under doorways and hums in the pipes. And yet, every winter, without fail, I still think I hear it. A knock, a soft rap on the door, barely there, and my heart stirs, thinking, maybe someone still remembers. I do not answer anymore, but I listen, because this house was not just built from wood and stone. It was built from memory, from rescue, from resistance against the kind of cold that takes everything. That is why I stayed. That is why I never sold. And that is why I will never sign. They said it was for my care. That was the phrase they kept using, over and over again, like a lullaby meant to soothe a baby or dull the mind of someone they assumed was fading. For your care, Grandma, for your safety, to give you the comfort you deserve. I nodded when they said it, smiled faintly like an old fool, and pretended not to see the way they avoided eye contact. when they handed me more papers. They acted like they were doing me a favor, like putting me in a facility 3 towns over would be a mercy, a kindness, like being removed from the only home I ever knew was some act of devotion. I played along. That is something you learn when you age, how to pretend you do not know more than they think you do. The truth came to me in the most careless of ways. It always does. Does it not? It was early evening. The snow was falling steady, heavy with the hush of night. I was supposed to be asleep. They thought I had gone to bed after dinner, but I had only gone to my room to rest my legs. I heard the phone buzz first. Her voice came next. Yeah, no, she has not signed yet. My daughter-in-law whispered into the receiver, pacing in the hallway just outside my door. But it's fine. She's just slow. Once she signs, we can finally move forward. The first deposit already came in for Lot A. A pause, then a chuckle. Yeah, the view's worth double. They loved the idea of a lakeside fire pit. Said they could already picture the glass walls facing the ice. I sat up. She kept talking. Lower now, but not careful enough. We'll level the cabin within a week once the paperwork's in. The permits are lined up. Don't worry. The LLC is in my son's name. Clean and clear. The hallway creaked. I heard her footsteps retreat down the stairs, the murmur fading into the kitchen. I stared at the dark. Lot A. Deposit. Level the cabin. LLC. That night, I did not sleep. My hands gripped the edge of the mattress as the storm outside turned to ice. My breath came short and shallow, not from fear, but from the ache that comes when a truth cuts deeper than any knife. It was never about my care. It was never about safety or family or any of the soft lies they coated their words with. They were trying to take what was not theirs. The next morning, I brewed my tea slower than usual, listening to the wind knock gently against the windows, like an old friend coming to check in. I waited until the house emptied. My grandson had left for a meeting. My daughter-in-law out to run errands. I moved through the house like I had 1,000 times before, each step steady, with the memory of where the floorboards creaked and where they didn't. In the office, tucked under a pile of real estate flyers, I found the folder. It was thick, printed on glossy paper with tabs and post-its and lines drawn in red ink. At the front was a mock-up image, clean, modern structures with floor-to-ceiling windows, wraparound porches, fireplaces that opened onto frozen lake views. The headline, Tranquility Ridge, a lakeside luxury community. Tranquility. How fitting. They had divided the property into 6 parcels, each one marked with square footage, potential value, and estimated ROI, return on investment. A second home for the wealthy, a getaway for those who would never know the history beneath their feet. On the last page, business registration forms, an LLC filed 3 months ago. The registered agent, my grandson, my own blood. There was no mention of my name anywhere, not in the plans, not in the ownership, not even a footnote of acknowledgement. They had written me out of my own life. I stood in that room, the folder heavy in my hand, and I felt the sharp chill of realization spread through my chest. They had not just wanted my signature. They wanted my absence, my silence, my erasure. They thought I was too old to notice, too slow to stop them. But what they forgot, what they always forget, is that age does not dull the memory of betrayal. It sharpens it. And now I knew. The house that kept strangers alive during the worst storm of the century was nothing more than a sales pitch to them. The land where I buried my husband's ashes was a profit margin. The fireplace I lit every morning was marked for demolition. They thought I was just wood and bone. They forgot I was still fire. It had been more than 20 years since I last opened that safe. Back then, my hands were steadier. My hair was a shade darker. My husband was still alive, and the world, while never easy, still felt like something I could hold on to. Now the combination lock sat there like an old riddle. Its numbers faded, the dial slightly stiff from cold and age. I stood in front of it in the dim light of the basement, the hum of the furnace rumbling in the distance like a slumbering beast. Dust floated in lazy circles around me, stirred only by my breath and the beating of a heart that had, for the first time in weeks, remembered how to feel dangerous again. I had not planned on opening it, not until the lies found voices in my hallway. Not until they wrapped themselves around my name and tried to bury me alive beneath paperwork and intentions. But now that I had seen the folder, read the words, level the cabin, and found my grandson's name on documents that did not belong to him, I knew exactly where I needed to go. The safe was hidden behind a false panel in the back of the cellar, covered by old coats and unused snowshoes. My husband built it himself, back in the spring of 1983, just after a visit from a man named Russell Lane, a quiet, careful representative from a small environmental conservation group based in Anchorage. He and my husband had spoken for hours that day. I remember how animated he had been, how proud he looked when he came up from the meeting and said, "We did something today that will outlast us both." I hadn't thought about that man in decades. Not until now. I wiped the dust from the dial with my sleeve. My fingers trembled, more from memory than cold. The numbers. What were the numbers? And then it came. May 23rd, 67. May 23, 1967. The day our daughter was born, the only child we had before the twins. The one who didn't make it past her third winter. Pneumonia took her faster than the doctors could explain, and we buried her beneath the birch tree overlooking the lake. My husband never spoke of her death again, not in words. But I found the date carved into his workshop bench, etched again into the wooden handle of his axe, and I suspected, here. I turned the dial slowly. 5:23:67. The click that followed was so soft, I almost missed it. I knelt, twisted the handle, and opened the door. Inside was a bundle of documents wrapped in oilskin, still dry and intact despite the years. I lifted it with both hands, sat on the old bench beside the furnace, and unwrapped the past. The first page bore the header I had not seen in decades: Alaska Land and Environmental Heritage Trust. Beneath it, the bolded title: Private Land, Conservation, and Sacred Site Designation, Agreement of Protection and Stewardship. Dated April 18, 1983. Signed, William James Halpern, my husband, and beneath his signature, another, Russell Lane, Project Officer. I turned page after page. The agreement detailed everything: the boundaries of our land, the historical significance of the site, the cabin's role in housing and saving disaster victims, and most importantly, the spiritual recognition of the land as protected space under state and federal environmental preservation law. The language was precise. This parcel of land, including any structures currently standing or erected in the future, shall not be transferred, sold, or altered in any way, structurally or legally, without written, verified, and notarized consent of the original signatory and/or surviving spouse. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I had. I'd been holding, this was it. The truth they had forgotten. They assumed time had buried everything. That I, the old woman who kept her curtains drawn and her tea kettle whistling like clockwork, had no memory, no legal strength, no cards left to play. But this agreement, this binding contract, had never expired, and I was still alive, still the surviving spouse, still the gatekeeper. At the very bottom of the packet was a copy of a registered notice, filed with the Office of Environmental Heritage, Anchorage Division, certified copy on record. I leaned back against the bench, the papers spread out before me like armor. Tears prickled behind my eyes, not out of sadness, but out of a kind of fierce, burning gratitude. Gratitude that my husband had done this, that he had thought so far ahead, that he had believed enough in this house, this land, this us, to protect it from a future even he could not see. I looked at the safe, still open, and imagined him beside me. Mud on his boots, soot on his cheek, grinning with that crooked smile that used to make me laugh no matter how mad I was. You always said they'd try something. I whispered to the silence. You were right. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the oilskin, and held them close. They could draw maps, file deeds, even whisper threats in their silk-laced voices. But this was mine, and now I had something they didn't expect. Proof. I'll sign in 3 days. That was all I said. 3 days. Not today. Not now. Just enough to lower their guard. My daughter-in-law's eyes lit up the moment the words left my lips. My grandson looked at me like I had finally come to my senses. They did not press me further. Not after that. They simply smiled. Tight, satisfied smiles. And left me alone to rest. But rest was not what I had in mind. As soon as they drove into town the next morning, I got to work. I laid the conservation papers flat on the dining table, smoothing every corner. The name I had not spoken aloud in years came to me like a whisper riding the smoke from the fireplace. Jack Burnham. Jack had been my husband's friend, one of the few who had stayed honest while the rest chased money. He was sharp as a tack and dry as Alaska bark. A retired federal lawyer from the Bureau of Land and Natural Resources. He moved down south a while ago, somewhere near Juneau, I heard. But I had his number, still scribbled on an old recipe card wedged in the back of the phone book. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed. It had been years. Jack Burnham speaking. Came the voice, brisk and unmistakable. It's Anna, I said, clearing my throat. Anna Halpern? There was a pause, then a sudden shift in his tone. Well, I'll be damned. Anna. It's been what? 15 years? Closer to 20, I said. I need your help. I told him everything, slowly, clearly, reading each clause from the agreement my husband signed. Jack did not interrupt, not once. When I finished, I scanned the pages and sent them to the email he dictated over the phone. You still trust fax machines? I asked with a chuckle. I trust my eyes more, he replied. By dusk, I had a reply in my inbox. It was short, blunt. Jack never was one for drama. Anna, if you sign anything, they'll take everything. This is not just protected land. It's strategic property. The lakefront access, the elevation, the mineral shelf underneath. It's all on record. The government flagged your parcel in 2019 for conservation interest. It's under quiet monitoring. These developers are vultures. That LLC is a shell. They plan to flip the land before anyone catches on. Do not sign. I'm contacting an associate in Anchorage. Let's shake some trees. Jack. I sat back in my chair, the words sinking into me like a stone into ice. Strategic property. They weren't just stealing from an old woman. They were trying to outmaneuver the government. The thought would have made me laugh if it did not burn so deep. I made tea as I always did, letting the leaves steep longer than usual. I needed the bitterness. I sat at the kitchen table in silence, just me and the papers and the ticking of the old clock above the pantry. That sound used to annoy me. The second hand always a beat too loud. Tonight, it sounded like purpose. Tick. They think I am weak. Talk. They think I am blind. Tick. They think I am alone. But I am none of those things. I folded Jack's reply into the oilskin bundle, tucked it back beneath the floorboard under the pantry shelf, and replaced the loose panel with care. No one ever looks there. They never have. Just like they never looked at me. Really looked and saw anything more than age and softness. 3 days. That is what I gave them. But what I really gave them was rope. Let them plan. Let them gloat. Because when they come back with pens and contracts, when they sit me at this table and push that smirk behind their sweet voices, just sign here, Grandma. They will not see the storm I've prepared. They think silence means surrender. But silence, when chosen, is something else entirely. It is calculation. It is waiting. It is power. I told them I wanted to make a meal before signing. My last supper. I called it, with a trembling laugh and a weak smile. I told them I wanted the whole family present to say goodbye to the house, to bless their new beginning. They took the bait without question. All that's so sweet. Grandma, my grandson said, kissing the top of my head like I was already halfway buried. You won't regret this. My daughter-in-law ordered catering. No need for you to cook. Ma, you should just sit and rest. I nodded. Let her think the strength was gone from my hands. They even brought in a real estate attorney. Their own, of course. A young man in a shiny suit with slicked back hair and a handshake that felt like handling fish guts. I'll walk you through everything. Mrs. Halpern, he assured me, voice syrupy. We'll make it smooth. I smiled, small and weary. 3 days had passed since I gave them my false promise. 3 days since Jack's email arrived. And in that time, I had made my calls, quiet ones, precise, just like the kind my husband used to make when negotiating timber rights or storm repairs. This house had taught me patience. Now it would teach them reckoning. That evening, the house looked just as it had on Thanksgiving long ago. Lights glowing, snow drifting outside the windows, a table set for too many people in too small a space. Except this time, it was not warmth filling the air. It was anticipation. They all arrived early, hungry not for food, but for the signature. Their eyes sparkled like they were watching me dig my own grave. Is this everyone? I asked gently. Everyone who matters, my daughter-in-law said, looking around. Perfect, I said. Then came the knock. It was firm, professional. I shuffled over and opened the door. In stepped 2 strangers. The first, a tall woman in a charcoal coat and federal badge around her neck. Marissa Dean, Environmental Protection Liaison. The second, shorter, older, eyes like granite and a briefcase in hand. David Kwan, Federal Land Use Attorney. My family froze. I asked them to join us, I said calmly, stepping aside. This house has more than one signature to consider tonight. The silence that followed was so loud, I could hear the clock ticking behind me. Who? What is this? My grandson finally stammered. Cease, I said, turning to the crowd now gathering around the dining room table. Our representatives from the Conservation Trust. My husband and I entered into, back in 1983, and from the federal office that oversees sacred and strategic lands in Alaska. They're here because you've made some decisions without understanding who this land belongs to. I pulled out the document I had retrieved from the safe and laid it gently on the tablecloth, smoothing it flat with both palms. I'd like to read something, I said, voice steady now. This is from the conservation agreement filed and notarized over 40 years ago. I began to read. This parcel of land, including any structures currently standing or erected in the future, shall not be transferred, sold, or altered in any way, structurally or legally, without written, verified and notarized consent of the original signatory and / or surviving spouse. I looked up, and the surviving spouse, the real estate attorney, blinked. Ma'am, that document may be outdated. It is not. Marissa interrupted coolly, producing her own folder. This agreement was reviewed and reconfirmed by the Alaska Environmental Heritage Trust as recently as 2019. This property is on a federal interest list due to its location, structure, and historical function. During the 1981 storm emergency, David Kwan stepped forward, and if anyone here attempted to register a transfer or initiate a demolition under an LLC without disclosure of the status, well, that constitutes fraud. Serious fraud. My grandson's face drained of color. My daughter-in-law stumbled back into her chair. No one told us that, the lawyer whispered. Because they didn't know, I said, because they didn't ask. Because they thought I was too old to remember, too soft to resist. Marissa turned to me. Mrs. Halpern, would you like to file for formal injunction against this sale and development? I nodded once. Yes, effective immediately. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The silence after was louder than any scream. I turned to the people I once called family. You sat in this house and told me I was a burden, that I was in the way, that I was nothing but a woman who cooked and cleaned and took up space. You planned to destroy the only home I've ever known. You didn't even have the decency to ask what it meant to me. I reached down, picked up the untouched papers they had laid out, and held them between two fingers. I'm not signing this, I said, then let the pages fall into the fireplace behind me. They ignited instantly. Flames danced, just like my heart. I thought burning their contract in my fireplace would be the end of it. But fire, you see, does not just destroy. It reveals. Within 48 hours, the real storm began. Not a storm of snow or wind, but subpoenas, phone calls, and headlines that tore through my family faster than any blizzard ever could. It started with a call from Jack. They're trying to scramble, he said, but they made too many mistakes. Mistakes. That was putting it kindly. Handed over everything. Maps, bank statements I found in my grandson's room, emails I had quietly forwarded to Jack after snooping on the family laptop while they were out. I had no training in law, but I had eyes. I had memory. and I had nothing left to lose. Jack and his colleagues combed through it all like bloodhounds. What they found left no room for mercy. There were forged contractor invoices, construction permits filed under fake timelines, real estate listings uploaded to private investor forums, complete with artist renderings of a future resort that erased every trace of the cabin I had called home for half a century. The worst, though, came from the bank. My grandson, my own blood, had leveraged the land as collateral for a $1 million, a risky, high-interest bet on a crypto investment scheme he'd filed under the LLC he formed behind my back, using fake documentation that implied he already had clear title to the land. I thought, he never did. He just thought I was too old to notice. When the bank realized the land was federally protected and couldn't legally be transferred or mortgaged, they panicked. Lawyers were dispatched. The Environmental Trust filed an emergency cease and desist. Jack moved swiftly, and within a day, a court injunction was granted. All activity on the land was frozen, permits revoked, LLC flagged for investigation. It didn't end there. The local paper ran a story the following Sunday. Grandmother stops $1 million scam by own family. A photo of the cabin, me in front of it, wearing my husband's old flannel coat. Hands folded, jaw set. The town responded like wildfire. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years came by with casseroles and quiet apologies. Strangers stopped their snowmobiles near the edge of the property just to nod respectfully. Some even asked if they could help protect the place. Volunteers to maintain the trail, repaint the porch, restock the woodpile. But the real reckoning happened at the town hall. The mayor called a meeting to discuss community land integrity. I attended, seated in the front row, surrounded not by family, but by those who had once sought warmth in my home during the storm of 1981. They remembered. My grandson was summoned to answer questions. He tried to smile, tried to lie, but his voice cracked. He had no paperwork that held weight, no answers that held water, no soul left willing to defend him. And when the federal officer pulled up the full loan application, with my forged initials, a falsified death certificate for my husband, and a title document that never passed through legal, he broke right there, in front of a room full of townspeople and reporters. He sank into his chair, white as the snow outside. My daughter-in-law, seated beside him, kept her arms crossed tight, but her face betrayed it all. Contempt, regret, fear. They were stripped of the LLC, their accounts frozen. The bank announced legal pursuit of restitution. The court filed for fraud investigation under state and federal law. Jack said it could take years, but the outcome was already known. They would lose everything they tried to steal. I sat quietly as the judge read the motion aloud. This land shall remain indefinitely under the protection of the Alaska Environmental Heritage Trust. All legal rights revert solely to Mrs. Anna Halpern, widow of William Halpern, as recorded in the original deed. Applause followed, but I did not smile. I simply bowed my head, not in shame, in closure. The snow fell again last night, thick, slow, silent flakes blanketed the roof as I sat by the fire, coaxing the flames to life with pine kindling and the last bits of birch bark from the pile. The wind whispered at the windows, gentle now, as if it, too, had finally decided to let the house rest. I moved slowly these days, but not aimlessly. Every motion had a memory tucked into it, fingers knowing where the wood creaked, when to twist the old stove's damper just right. How many minutes until the kettle would sing? This house didn't need clocks. It had me. I leaned back in my chair, pulled the blanket up to my knees, and stared into the fire. Not at the flames, but through them, through time, really. Back to when his hands, strong and steady, built that hearthstone. When he turned to me, soot on his face, and said the words that had lived inside me like scripture ever since. When they think you're weak, they get careless. He said it with a chuckle, not malice, as if it were a joke told between comrades, not a warning meant to span decades. He was right. They were careless because they thought I was weak, because I'd grown quiet, because I'd grown old. But I wasn't weak. I was watching. And when the time came to strike, I didn't need to raise my voice. I only had to raise the truth. The town had changed since the hearing. People waved more now. Some brought food. One woman from the city asked if she could sketch the cabin. Said it had become a symbol of heritage defiance. I told her to draw whatever she liked, just so long as she didn't try to own it. Jack called last week to tell me the paperwork was final. The cabin and surrounding land were now recognized as a joint site of historical and environmental significance. Protected forever. Maintained by the very agency my husband had believed in. They would cover upkeep. Volunteers would rotate through to tend the trail and educate school children. And the building itself, it would remain exactly as it was, down to the knots in the door frame and the scratches on the floor where the dogs used to run. They asked if they could call it a museum. I said yes, so long as they left the stove working and the rocking chair by the window. They did more than that. They carved a plaque into the wall, just above the mantel, burned into the cedar in firm, weathered lettering. It reads, "This is the house they thought had no value, only because the last person living in it was me." Some visitors cry when they read it. I don't. I just nod. As for the ones who betrayed me, the world has a way of dealing with them. Without my help, my grandson, once so smug, so eager to erase me, now works nights as a janitor at a corporate complex 2 counties over. He scrubs toilets in buildings he used to dream of owning. When asked for references, he lists no family, and my daughter-in-law. She left without a word, no note, no apology, nothing. Some people asked me if I was angry, if I wanted vengeance, if I wanted to see them suffer more. I always give the same answer. No, because I never needed revenge. I had something stronger. Time. Time exposed every lie. Time revealed every intention. Time peeled back the false smiles, the greedy whispers, the hands reaching not for love, but for legacy. I didn't scream. I didn't throw dishes or curse their names in the street. I waited. I held my silence like a blade, sheathed, but ready. And when the moment came, I used it. Now I sit here, alone but not lonely, in the same chair where I once rocked babies, where I once nursed grief, where I once wondered if silence meant defeat. Sometimes silence is a seed, and today it has bloomed. Every morning, I light the fire. I make tea. I open the door and breathe in the crisp air of a land I was never meant to leave. The birch tree still stands by the lake. My husband rests beneath it just as he wished. And when the wind moves through its branches, I imagine I hear him laughing. He would have liked how it ended. Not with shouting, not with blood, but with truth and legacy and snow falling gently on a home that refused to be erased. Because justice doesn't always arrive on horseback or in headlines. Sometimes it comes softly, like winter, like a knock on the door, like the whisper of a woman who was never supposed to matter, but did, and always will. If this story touched something deep in you, if you've ever felt overlooked, discarded, or told you were too old to matter, then know this: your silence is not weakness. Your memory is not noise. It is your power. Here on Grandma True Stories, we share the truths that were never meant to be told, not for pity, but for clarity. Because revenge has no expiration date, and wisdom doesn't shout. It remembers. So if you believe in stories that matter, in justice that waits quietly, and in voices that refuse to die out, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Join a community where the forgotten are finally heard, because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one who changes everything.